Morris Johnson was 15 years old when he learned that family is just a word until someone proves otherwise. Standing in the October cold with his 13-year-old sister Rose, watching their foster parents' door slam shut, he had one backpack between them, $5 in his pocket, and a promise he'd made to their dying mother, to keep Rose safe. No matter what. For days later, that $5 would buy them a house everyone said was a death sentence. But what those two homeless kids turned it into didn't just shock the town, it saved lives and proved that the smallest people, with the smallest chance, can build the biggest miracles when they refuse to let each other fall. The foster home had never been warm. Just temporary. The kind of place where children learn to take up less space, to keep their voices down, to stop expecting things like birthdays or goodnight hugs. For 2 years after their mother died, Morris and Rose had learned those lessons well. The house was a squat brick ranch on the tired edge of town, with beige siding that had yellowed in the sun. Inside, it smelled like pine sol and disappointment. The television was always on. Nobody ever sat together. That night, Morris stood in the narrow hallway, Rose's hand gripped tight in his. She was small for 13, all sharp elbows and watchful eyes, her long brown hair falling past her shoulders. He could hear Sandra and Richard in the kitchen, their voices low but not low enough. 2 years is enough, Sandra was saying, her tone flat and administrative. We did what we could. The state payment barely covers groceries anyway. He's old enough to work, Richard added. Plenty of kids make it on their own at 15. Morris felt Rose's hand trembling. She looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes that asked the question he couldn't answer. Are they talking about us? He squeezed her hand once. A silent signal they'd developed over years of being invisible. Stay quiet. I'll handle it. Sandra appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes fixed somewhere past Morris's left shoulder as if looking directly at him would require more energy than she had. Morris, she said. Not unkind. Just tired. This isn't working anymore. He had practiced this moment in his head 100 times. All the things he could promise, to be quieter, smaller, more useful. But when the moment came, the words stuck somewhere between his chest and his throat. We can help more, he said finally, and his voice came out thinner than he wanted. Around the house. Rose and I can do more chores. It's not about chores, Richard interrupted, still watching the television. You're 15, Morris. That's old enough to figure things out. The girl's 13. You can get work. There are shelters. Old enough. The words landed like stones. Please, Morris tried again, hating how desperate it sounded. I'll sleep in the garage. Or the basement. Rose can have my room. We won't be any trouble. Sandra's jaw tightened. Morris. This isn't a negotiation. Rose made a small sound, quickly swallowed. Pack your things, Sandra continued, already turning back toward the kitchen. You can stay tonight, but I need you both out by morning. The television kept playing. Bright, cheerful voices selling detergent. Morning came cold and gray. Morris woke before dawn, his body already knowing what his mind didn't want to accept. He packed carefully while Rose sat on the edge of her bed, watching him with hollow eyes. His tan backpack first, then Rose's dark green one. The photograph of their mother he kept folded in his jacket pocket, her smile caught mid-laugh, back when the world still made sense. The small wad of cash from their mother's last birthday card, never spent, saved for emergencies. He counted it twice. $5. By 8 a.m., they stood on the front porch. The October air bit through their hoodies, sharp and unforgiving. Behind them, the door closed. The lock clicked. Final. Absolute. Sandra didn't say goodbye. The porch light flicked off. Morris adjusted his backpack and reached for Rose's hand. Where do we go? She whispered. He didn't have an answer. so he started walking. They followed the sidewalk past houses just waking up. Warm yellow light spilled from kitchen windows. Somewhere, a father called his daughter to breakfast. Each window felt like a small, private world Morris and Rose no longer belonged to. By the time they reached the edge of town, his legs ached and Rose was limping. They sat on a wooden bench near the closed hardware store. He thought about his mother then. Not in the big, dramatic way people talked about grief, but in fragments. The way she used to hum while making breakfast. Her voice reading to them at bedtime. Her hands, rough from work but gentle on his face, the night she died in the hospital. Promise me, baby. Keep Rose safe. No matter what. He had promised. And now he was sitting on a bench with his 13-year-old sister, $5 to their names, and nowhere to go. They spent that night behind the hardware store, huddled against the back wall. Morris gave Rose his beige hoodie, layering it over her burgundy one. He told her he wasn't cold. He was lying. She fell asleep with her head on his shoulder. Morris stayed awake, listening to every sound, a car passing, a dog barking 3 blocks over. He woke every hour, jolted by cold seeping deeper into his bones. When dawn finally came, it didn't bring warmth. Just clarity. We can't stay like this. That was when he saw it. The paper taped crookedly to the bulletin board outside the courthouse, fluttering in the morning breeze. County auction, unclaimed property. Most people walked past it without slowing. Morris didn't. He stepped closer, Rose trailing behind him, and squinted at the faded print. The list was short. Most properties had minimum bids in the hundreds. But there, near the bottom, one listing caught his eye. Abandoned cabin, County Road 47. Condemned. Structural collapse. Minimum bid, $5. Rose tugged his sleeve. Morris, what are you looking at? He pulled the $5 bill from his pocket, smoothed it against his palm. $5 could buy them 2 meals, maybe 3 if they were careful. Or it could buy them a roof. Morris? Rose's voice was small, worried. He looked down at her too thin face, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, her hands already chapped from one night in the cold. For more nights like this would kill them both. Come on, he said, taking her hand. The auction's at noon. And that's when Morris made a choice that would change everything. Because sometimes, when you're standing at the edge of the world with nothing left to lose, the craziest option becomes the only option. And sometimes, that's exactly what it takes to survive. The courthouse smelled like old wood and stale coffee. Morris and Rose slipped into the back row of folding chairs, trying to be invisible. Around them sat farmers in worn caps, real estate agents with clipboards, people who looked like they belonged. Morris felt every eye on them. Those foster kids, someone whispered. Shame what happened. The auctioneer was a thick man with a voice like gravel. He moved through the listings fast. A foreclosed farmhouse went for $8,000. An empty lot for $1,200. Each time the gavel fell, Morris felt his heart sink lower. Then the auctioneer paused, shuffling his papers like he didn't want to read what came next. Next item. Abandoned cabin on County Road 47. He cleared his throat. I'm required to tell you this property is condemned. The roof has collapsed. A man died there in 2019. The county just wants it off the books. Minimum bid is $5. Do I have $5? Silence. The kind of silence that gets heavier the longer it lasts. Someone in the front row laughed, short and uncomfortable. You couldn't pay me to take that death trap, a woman muttered. Morris felt Rose tugging his sleeve, her fingers digging in. Morris, no. That place kills people. His hand was shaking when he raised it. The auctioneer blinked, surprised. You're bidding, son. Morris's throat was so dry he could barely speak. Yes, sir. $5. More whispers now, louder. That's just a kid. Someone should stop this. The auctioneer looked uncomfortable but nodded. I have $5. Anyone else? No one moved. Going once. Twice. The gavel came down with a crack that sounded final as a gunshot. Sold to the young man for $5. See the clerk for paperwork. 20 minutes later, Morris stood outside holding a piece of paper that said he owned property. His hands were still shaking. Rose stood beside him, her face pale. We really did it, she whispered. We bought a house. Morris folded the deed carefully and put it in his pocket next to their mother's photo. Now we have to see it, he said. Rose's voice was barely audible. I'm scared. Me too, Morris admitted. But scared doesn't mean we don't go. It just means what we're doing matters. They started walking. County Road 47 was further than the map suggested. By the time they saw it in the distance, the sun was starting to sink. And there it was. The cabin. Worse than he'd imagined. The roof had caved in completely, broken beams jutting into the sky like broken bones. The walls sagged. The windows were just empty holes. A sign hung crooked on the porch. $5 for sale. Rose stopped walking. She just stood there, staring. Morris, her voice cracked. We're going to die here. He wanted to tell her she was wrong. He wanted to promise everything would be okay. But standing there, looking at what $5 had bought them, he couldn't lie. So instead, he took her hand and said the only true thing he could think of. We're going to live here, Rose. And he led her forward, toward the impossible. The first night in the cabin nearly killed them. Morris stood in what used to be the main room, staring up at the sky through the gaping hole in the roof. Wind cut through the walls like they weren't even there. The floor was covered in debris, rotted wood, broken glass, years of leaves and animal droppings. Rose wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. Where do we sleep? Morris cleared a corner with his hands, pushing away the worst of the filth. Here. We'll sleep here. But there's no roof, Rose said, her voice small and scared. Tomorrow we'll fix it, Morris lied. Tonight we just need to stay warm. He tried to build a fire with wet wood and broken pieces of the cabin. It took him 40 minutes to get a flame that lasted more than a few seconds. The smoke made his eyes water. The heat barely reached past his hands. They huddled together in that corner, both their backpacks as pillows, both their hoodies layered on Rose. Morris told her stories about their mother, anything to keep her mind off the cold. Remember when Mom made pancakes shaped like animals? Rose nodded against his chest. Mine were always elephants. Morris smiled in the darkness. Mine were always blobs. Rose laughed, just a little. Mom said they were abstract art. But around midnight, the temperature dropped. Rose started shivering so hard her teeth chattered. Morris held her tighter, rubbing her arms, but it wasn't enough. I'm so cold, Morris. I can't stop shaking. Panic grabbed his throat. He couldn't let her freeze. Not on the first night. Not ever. He fed more wood to the dying fire, precious wood they'd need for fixing the roof. The flames grew. Rose's shivering slowly eased. Morris didn't sleep. He stayed awake all night, feeding the fire, watching Rose breathe, listening to the wind howl through the broken walls. Every hour felt like a test he might fail. When dawn finally came gray and cold, Rose opened her eyes. We made it, she whispered. Morris nodded, exhausted beyond words. One night down. But as he looked around at the catastrophic damage in the morning light, at the scale of what they'd have to fix, he realized something terrifying. One night down meant nothing. They had to survive hundreds more. And he had no idea how. The cabin seemed to laugh at him. This place wasn't shelter. It was a countdown. And winter was coming fast. The first week was hell. Morris learned construction the hard way, through bloody hands and mistakes that could have killed them. He didn't know that rottenwood snapped under weight, didn't know which beams were structural and which weren't, didn't know how to seal gaps against wind that cut like knives. Every lesson came with a price. Splinters buried deep in his palms. Cuts that wouldn't stop bleeding. A hammer that slipped and nearly broke his thumb. Rose insisted on helping despite Morris telling her to rest. She sorted through debris, separating usable wood from trash, organizing their few supplies with careful precision. She was smarter than he'd given her credit for. She noticed things. Which corner stayed driest when it rained? Where the wind hit hardest? How to stack wood so the fire burned longer? But they were running out of everything. Food. Energy. Hope. Morris had been skipping meals, giving Rose the bigger portions, telling her he'd eaten earlier. She discovered his lie on the fourth day when she found his hidden stash, untouched granola bars he'd been saving for her. Their first real fight happened in that broken cabin, Rose crying angry tears. "I'm not a baby, Morris. Stop lying to me. You're going to starve yourself and then what happens to me?" He had no answer for that. So they made a deal. "We do this together or not at all. Equal portions. Equal work. Equal honesty." It was harder than Morris expected, learning to share the burden instead of carrying it alone. That evening, as the sun set and they tried to seal another section of wall, an old pickup truck rumbled up the dirt road. Morris tensed, pulling Rose behind him. A man climbed out, weathered face, gray beard, flannel shirt. He stood there for a long moment, just watching them work. "You're doing it wrong," the man finally said. His voice was rough but not unkind. Morris bristled. "We're figuring it out." The man walked closer, examined the wall Morris had been working on for hours. "This won't hold through winter. Your cuts are fighting the grain. Wood splits with the grain, not against it." Morris wanted to tell him to leave, that they didn't need help, didn't need pity. But Rose stepped forward. "Can you show us? Please." The man looked at her, then at Morris. Something in his expression softened. "Name's Collins. I run the hardware store in town. Saw you two at the auction. Thought you were crazy." He paused. "Maybe still do. But crazy doesn't mean you have to die stupid." He spent the next hour teaching Morris how to read wood grain, how to measure twice and cut once, how to use leverage instead of strength. His hands were patient, his explanations clear. When the sun dropped below the trees, Collins walked back to his truck. He returned carrying a cardboard box. Set it down without ceremony. Scrap materials. Was going to throw them out anyway. Inside were nails, twine, a tarp, things that might as well have been gold. "Why are you helping us?" Morris asked, his voice cracking. Collins looked at him for a long moment. "Because I was 16 once, alone and desperate. And nobody helped me." He climbed into his truck. "Come by the store Monday. I've got odd jobs if you want them. Pays cash." Then he was gone, taillights disappearing into the growing dark. Rose looked at the box, then at Morris. "We're not alone," she whispered. Morris felt something shift in his chest. For the first time since they'd been kicked out, he felt something other than fear. It wasn't hope exactly. Not yet. But it was close. "Maybe we can actually do this," he said quietly. Rose slipped her hand into his. "We will," she said. "Because we have to." And for the first time, Morris almost believed her. November came early and angry. The first frost hit hard, coating everything in white that wasn't quite snow but promised worse to come. Morris woke to find ice crystals on the inside of the tarp they'd hung as a temporary roof. Rose's breath came out in visible clouds. They were running out of time. But something had changed. Morris started working odd jobs for Collins and other townspeople who'd heard about the two kids fighting the impossible. Fence repairs. Shed cleanups. Splitting firewood. The pay was small but steady. $20 here. $15 there. Every bill felt like a lifeline. Rose managed their money with careful precision, rationing food down to the calorie, making meals stretch further than seemed possible. She surprised him with her resourcefulness. She learned which wild plants were edible, found a creek where she could catch rainwater, discovered that burnt wood could seal small cracks better than mud. She wasn't just surviving alongside him anymore. She was keeping them both alive. The cabin slowly transformed. One wall sealed completely. Then another. The tarp roof reinforced with salvaged boards. A makeshift door that actually closed. Windows covered with plastic sheeting Collins had donated. It wasn't warm, but it was warmer. It wasn't safe, but it was safer. Anonymous donations started appearing. A bag of canned food left by the door. Firewood stacked neatly by the wall. Old blankets folded on the porch. No notes. No names. Just the town quietly deciding these kids deserved a chance. Morris's pride wanted to refuse. Rose's practicality won. "We say thank you and we survive," she told him firmly. "Pride doesn't keep you warm." By mid-November, Morris had calluses on his calluses. His hands were scarred and strong. He could frame a wall now, seal a roof seam, build a fire that lasted through the night. Collins watched him work one afternoon and nodded approval. "You're not just surviving anymore, son. You're building." But then the first real storm hit. 3 days of freezing rain that found every weakness in their repairs. Water leaked through seams they thought were sealed. The wind tested every board. Morris and Rose worked around the clock, patching, reinforcing, fighting the cabin's constant attempts to collapse. On the third night, exhausted and soaked, Rose started coughing. Just small coughs at first. Morris told himself it was nothing. By morning, she was burning with fever. And Morris felt his world tilt sideways. Because losing Rose wasn't just his worst fear. It would be the end of everything. For 3 days, Morris didn't leave her side. He kept the fire burning hot, wrapped her in every blanket they owned, made her drink water even when she pushed it away. Her fever climbed. She shivered violently one moment, kicked off blankets the next. Morris tried everything he could think of, cold compresses when she burned, extra layers when she shook. Nothing worked. He didn't sleep. Didn't eat. Just watched her breathe, terrified that if he looked away for 1 second, she'd stop. He thought about taking her to the hospital. But hospitals meant questions. Questions meant foster care. Foster care meant separation. He'd promised to keep her safe. Taking her away from him didn't feel safe. On the 4th day, Collins appeared. He took one look at Rose, then at Morris, and his expression hardened. "When did you last eat, son?" Morris couldn't remember. "When did you last sleep?" Morris didn't answer. Collins grabbed his shoulder. "You can't help her if you're dead. You hear me? Sit down. Eat this. I'll watch her." Morris wanted to argue. But his legs gave out before he could. Collins caught him, guided him to sit, pushed food into his hands. "Eat. Then sleep. 2 hours. I'll wake you if anything changes." Morris tried to protest. Collins's voice went firm. "That girl needs you alive and functional. Right now, you're neither. So eat and sleep, or I'm taking her to the hospital myself." Morris ate. He slept. When he woke 2 hours later, Collins was still there, watching Rose breathe, keeping the fire high. "You did good, Morris. Better than most grown men could. But you can't do everything alone." Morris felt something break inside him. "I promised my mom I'd keep her safe. If Rose dies, I failed everyone." Collins looked at him with surprising gentleness. "You're 15 years old, carrying weight that would crush men twice your age. Asking for help isn't failure. It's survival." That afternoon, Rose's fever broke. She opened her eyes, weak but clear. "Morris?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here," he said, gripping her hand. "I'm right here." She managed a small smile. "You look terrible." He laughed, the sound cracked and relieved. "You're one to talk." Over the next week, Rose recovered slowly. She insisted on helping even while weak, organizing supplies from her bedroll, giving Morris instructions. Morris learned something crucial during those days. Rose wasn't the burden he'd feared she was. She was the reason he was strong enough to survive. And together, they were building something neither could have built alone. December arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. But the cabin was ready. Walls sealed tight. Roof reinforced and holding. Windows covered properly. A real door that locked. Morris stood back one afternoon and realized with shock that it didn't look like a death trap anymore. It looked like a home. Rose hung makeshift decorations, strips of fabric and pine cones, trying to make their first Christmas without their mother feel less empty. The town had changed too. People nodded at Morris when he walked by. Some stopped to ask how the cabin was holding up. Collins offered him steady work, 3 days a week at decent pay. "You've got real skill now, son. Could make a career of this if you wanted." Morris saved every dollar. Rose managed their budget like an accountant. They had food stored. Firewood stacked. Warm clothes Collins's wife had donated. For the first time since the foster home, Morris let himself believe they might actually make it. Christmas Eve arrived cold and still. The forecast called for a massive storm, the kind that buried the town under 2 feet of snow and shut down roads for days. Morris prepared obsessively, checking every seal, stacking extra firewood, filling containers with water. Rose watched him with amusement. "We've survived worse." Morris couldn't shake the feeling something was coming. "Maybe. But I'm not taking chances. Not with you." The storm hit at dusk. Wind howled like something alive and angry. Snow fell so thick Morris couldn't see 10 feet beyond the window. The cabin groaned under the assault but held. Their reinforcements working. The fire burned bright and warm. Rose sat reading by candlelight, peaceful despite the chaos outside. Morris allowed himself a moment of pride. They'd done it. 2 homeless kids with $5 had built shelter strong enough to survive winter's worst. Then came the knock at the door. Desperate. Frantic. Morris and Rose exchanged glances. Nobody traveled in storms like this. Nobody should even be out here. Morris opened the door and found a man, snow-covered and terrified, holding a small bundle. His wife stumbled behind him, clutching a young child. "Please," the man gasped. "Our car went off the road. My baby, she's not breathing right. Please help us." Morris looked at the bundle in the man's arms. A tiny girl, maybe 18 months old, her lips tinged blue, her skin too pale. He'd seen that before with Rose. Hypothermia. She was dying. And suddenly, everything Morris had learned through suffering, every brutal lesson about keeping someone alive in the cold, meant something more than just survival. "Get inside," he said, pulling them through the door. Now. The cabin became organized chaos. Morris remembered Rose's fever, what worked and what didn't. "Warm her slowly," he told the parents. "Not fast. fast can kill her. He stripped the baby's wet clothes, wrapped her in dry blankets near the fire but not too close. Rose handled the older child without being asked, keeping her calm, distracting her from her sister's stillness. The mother was crying. The father, Richard, looked helpless and terrified. Morris brought warmed water, not hot. Made the baby drink tiny sips. Kept her wrapped and monitored. His hands were steady even though his heart raced. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about a life that depended on what he knew. Rose appeared beside him with more blankets, anticipating what he needed before he asked. They worked together like they'd done this 100 times. An hour passed. The longest hour of Morris's life. The cabin shook under the storm's fury, but the walls held because Morris had reinforced them. The fire stayed lit because Rose had learned proper venting. The baby stayed warm because 2 homeless kids had learned how to survive the unsurvivable. Then the baby cried. A small, weak sound that was the most beautiful thing Morris had ever heard. The mother sobbed with relief. Richard stared at Morris with something like awe. You saved her. You're just a kid and you saved my daughter's life. Morris shook his head, exhausted. I just did what I had to do. The storm raged through the night. 8 people in that small cabin, sharing food, warmth, stories. Richard couldn't stop looking around. You built this? You and your sister? Morris nodded. We didn't have a choice. Rose added quietly, having no choice made us strong. Morning came gray and silent. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried in white. Richard's family prepared to leave, baby Emma healthy and wrapped warm. Richard pressed money into Morris's hand. Take it. You earned this. You're not kids playing house. You're survivors who became saviors. After they left, Rose hugged Morris tight. We didn't just survive, she whispered. We helped someone else survive. Morris looked around their cabin, this place that had almost killed them, that they'd turned into shelter, into hope, into something that mattered. We built more than a house, Rose. We built proof that broken things can become the things that save you. Word spread fast. The kids who bought the death shack for $5 saved the Richards family. The story became legend. Morris wasn't those poor kids anymore. He was the boy who refused to quit. Rose wasn't the burden. She was the strength beside him. The town saw them differently now. Not with pity, but with respect. Collins made his offer official. Legal guardianship until Morris turned 18. They could keep their cabin, but they'd have a safety net, paperwork, legitimacy. We don't need saving, Collins told them. We just need to make sure the system doesn't take you apart. Morris and Rose accepted. Not as charity, but as family choosing family. Winter eased into spring. Ice melted. Green returned. The cabin transformed further. A real porch. A vegetable garden Rose planted. A workshop where Morris practiced his craft. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living. The Richards family visited often, baby Emma toddling around, healthy and bright. She calls your cabin the warm house, Richard's wife said. Because it saved her when she was cold. Morris started teaching other kids carpentry, troubled teens who needed to learn that building things could teach you that you weren't broken. Rose tutored struggling students, showing them that being small didn't mean being weak. The cabin became more than their home. It became a beacon. The light Morris kept burning every night wasn't just for them anymore. It was for anyone who needed to know that shelter existed, that hope was real, that impossible could become possible. Years later, Morris stood on that same porch, now a master carpenter, Rose beside him, now studying to be a teacher. The cabin had expanded, became a community shelter during storms, always open, light always on. Someone knocked. A young girl, maybe 14, scared and alone. Do you have room? she asked. Morris smiled, remembering a boy who once had $5 and nowhere to go. We always have room, he said. Come in. You're safe here. Rose appeared with blankets and food, the way it had always been between them. The girl looked around, tears in her eyes. How did you do this? How did you survive? Morris and Rose exchanged glances. We had each other, Rose said simply. And we refused to let each other fall. Morris Johnson was 15 years old when he learned that family is just a word until someone proves otherwise. He and Rose proved it with $5, a condemned cabin, and a promise kept through impossible odds. They turned abandonment into determination, shelter into salvation, and showed the world that the smallest people with the smallest chance can build the biggest miracles when they refuse to quit. Because sometimes, survival isn't the end of the story. Sometimes, it's just the beginning of everything that matters. Morris and Rose were 15 and 13 when they had nothing but each other and $5. They turned impossibility into shelter, shelter into salvation, and proved that resilience lives in the most unexpected places. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that the human spirit can survive what should break it, don't let it end here. Subscribe for more true stories of courage, survival, and the quiet strength it takes to keep going when the world says you can't. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to quit. And sometimes, that refusal changes everything. Drop a comment and tell us, where are you watching from? And what would you have done with $5 and nowhere to go? Share this story with someone who needs to remember that broken doesn't mean finished, and that the smallest chance can become the biggest miracle when you refuse to let go.